The morning sun filtered through our kitchen windows, casting long shadows across the breakfast table where three lives intersected in careful silence. I sat nursing my coffee, watching steam curl from the ceramic mug that read, "World's Best Dad," a gift from better times. Across from me, Brenda turned newspaper pages with mechanical precision, her wedding ring catching the light as she absently stirred her tea. Karen hunched over her phone to my right, thumbs scrolling endlessly through whatever digital drama consumed 18-year-olds these days. 5 years, that's how long we'd been married. How long I'd been trying to build something resembling a family from the broken pieces Brenda brought to our relationship. The silence wasn't uncomfortable exactly. It was practiced, rehearsed through countless mornings of careful politeness. "More coffee?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "I'm fine," Brenda replied without looking up, her voice carrying that distant quality I'd grown to recognize. Everything was fine with Brenda lately. Fine meant don't ask questions. Fine meant leave me alone. I studied her profile as she read, or pretended to read, the local news. At 42, she still turned heads when we went out together, though we rarely did that anymore. Her auburn hair caught the morning light, and for a moment I remembered the woman who'd laughed at my terrible jokes during our first date at Marcello's. That woman seemed like a stranger now. Karen cleared her throat, a sound that always preceded one of her carefully calculated observations. "Brian, did you remember to transfer money for my textbooks?" "Already done," I said, though she hadn't thanked me for the last transfer, or the one before that. "Check your account." She nodded without looking up from her screen, her dark hair falling across her face like a curtain. Karen had never been easy to connect with. I understood that. I wasn't her father, never tried to be, but I'd hoped that 5 years of showing up, of being reliable, might earn me something more than polite acknowledgement. Her real father, Marcus, had been a nightmare. During their divorce proceedings, I'd sat through court sessions where the details of his abuse were laid bare. The broken ribs, the blackened eyes, the night Brenda finally called the police when he'd thrown her down the stairs. I'd been her anchor through all of that, the steady presence who helped her rebuild. "I need to run some errands today," Brenda announced suddenly, folding the newspaper with sharp precision. "I'll be out most of the afternoon." More silence, more distance, more of whatever this had become. I'd tried to ignore the signs at first. The phone call she took in the bathroom, the way she showered immediately after coming home from her errands, the credit card charges from restaurants I'd never been to, hotels I'd never seen. But I wasn't stupid, and I wasn't blind. 2 weeks ago, I'd done something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. David Chen had come recommended by a colleague whose own marriage had imploded under similar circumstances. Professional, discreet, thorough, and expensive. $2,000 later, I had a manila envelope full of photographs, phone records, and hotel receipts that painted a picture I'd been dreading to see. Brenda wasn't just having an affair. She was having an affair with Marcus, the same Marcus who'd terrorized her for 8 years, the same Marcus whose restraining order had expired 6 months ago. The photographs were particularly damning. Brenda entering the Riverside Motel on Elm Street at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Marcus's truck in the parking lot. Both of them leaving together 3 hours later, Brenda's hair disheveled, her lipstick gone. But it was the text messages that truly revealed the scope of their deception. Screenshots of conversations that made my stomach turn. Marcus, "Can't wait to have you back where you belong." Brenda, "Soon, baby. I just need more time to figure out how to tell Brian." Marcus, "Tell him or don't. Either way, you're coming home to me." Home to him. After everything I'd done, everything I'd provided, everything I'd sacrificed to help her heal from the damage he'd caused. And Karen, sweet, innocent Karen who I'd put through college, bought a car for, treated like my own daughter, she knew. The investigator had photos of her at Marcus's apartment, photos of family dinners I was never invited to, photos that painted a picture of a life I wasn't part of. "Earth to Brian," Karen's voice cut through my thoughts. "Mom asked you a question." I looked up to find both women staring at me. "Sorry, what?" Brenda sighed with practiced irritation. "I said I might be late tonight. Don't wait up." "Another errand?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Something flickered across her face. Guilt, maybe, or annoyance at being questioned. "Yes, another errand. Is that a problem?" It was a huge problem. But not for the reasons she thought. "Of course not," I said, reaching for my coffee. "Take all the time you need." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, giving her permission to continue destroying our marriage, and she had no idea I already knew exactly where she'd be and who she'd be with. Karen's phone buzzed, and she glanced at it with a barely concealed smile. "Mom, Marcus says hi." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Brenda's face went white, then red. Then she shot Karen a look that could have melted steel. "Karen!" she said, her voice sharp with warning. But it was too late. The mask had slipped, and we all knew it. I set down my coffee cup with deliberate care. "Marcus says hi?" I repeated, letting the question linger. "That's interesting. I didn't realize you two were in contact with him." "It's not what you think," Brenda said quickly, but her voice betrayed her panic. "What I think," I said, standing slowly, "is that it's exactly what I think." The kitchen fell silent except for the tick of the wall clock and the distant hum of the refrigerator. 3 adults, 3 different versions of the truth, and only one of us who actually knew what was coming next. "Brian," Brenda started, but I held up a hand. "Actually," I said, walking to the window to look out at our perfectly manicured lawn, our perfectly normal neighborhood, our perfectly fraudulent life, "I think we need to have a conversation. A real one for once." I turned back to face them, and for the first time in months, I felt something besides resigned sadness. I felt the cold, calculated calm of a man who'd run out of patience for lies. "So," I said, settling back into my chair, "why don't you tell me about Marcus?" Brenda's hands shook as she reached for her tea, the cup rattling against the saucer. Karen had gone completely still, her phone forgotten on the table, screen dark. "I can explain," Brenda began, but I cut her off with a laugh that surprised all 3 of us. "Oh, I'm sure you can. You've always been good with explanations. But before you start, let me ask you something." I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a conversational tone that somehow felt more threatening than shouting. "Do you think I'm stupid? Brian, please." "Do you think," I continued, "that I wouldn't notice my wife disappearing for hours at a time? That I wouldn't wonder why you shower the moment you come home? That I wouldn't question why our credit card has charges from the Riverside Motel?" The color drained from her face completely. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You hired someone to follow me," Brenda whispered. "I hired someone to find out the truth," I corrected. "Something you seem incapable of providing." I stood and walked to the kitchen drawer where I kept important documents. Warranties, insurance papers, and now a manila envelope that contained the destruction of everything I'd built over the past 5 years. "David Chen is very thorough," I said, pulling out a selection of photographs. "Very professional. He doesn't make judgments, doesn't editorialize, just documents facts." I placed the first photo on the table, Brenda and Marcus entering the motel. Her sharp intake of breath was audible. "This was taken last Tuesday," I said calmly. "You told me you were shopping for Karen's birthday present." The second photo showed them leaving the motel, Marcus's hand on the small of her back, both of them laughing. "This was 3 hours later. Quite a shopping trip." Karen found her voice first. "You had no right." "I had every right," I said, my voice still maddeningly calm. "I'm her husband. I'm the man who's been paying for this house, your car, your college education, your mother's therapy bills, and every other expense in this family for 5 years." I placed another photo on the table, this one of Karen hugging Marcus outside his apartment. But apparently I'm not family. Am I, Karen? She looked like she wanted to disappear into her chair. Brenda reached across the table, whether to comfort her daughter or gather the photos, I couldn't tell. "Don't," I said sharply. "Don't touch them. You'll get your copies soon enough." "Brian?" Brenda's voice was barely a whisper. "It's not what it looks like." "Really?" I pulled out my phone and began reading from the screenshots David had provided. "Marcus, yesterday at 3:22 p.m. Can't wait to have you back where you belong. Your response at 3:24. Soon, baby. I just need more time to figure out how to tell Brian." Brenda's face crumpled. Karen looked physically sick. "More time to figure out how to tell me what exactly? That you're leaving? That you never got over the man who put you in the hospital? That everything we've built together means nothing?" "It's complicated," she said weakly. "No," I replied, sitting back down. "It's actually very simple. You've been cheating on me with your abusive ex-husband, and you've been using our stepdaughter as a go-between. There's nothing complicated about that." The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Finally, Brenda looked up, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Defiance. "You don't understand what Marcus and I have," she said, her voice gaining strength. "What we've always had. You're a good man, Brian, but you're not him." "Thank God for that," I said dryly. "He's changed," she continued, ignoring my comment. "He's gotten help. He's different now. Different enough to lie to your husband about seeing him? Different enough to sneak around like teenagers? Different enough to involve your daughter in deceiving the man who's been taking care of both of you? Karen finally spoke up, and her words cut deeper than I'd expected. You don't own us, Brian. Mom has a right to be happy. I stared at her for a long moment. This girl I'd driven to school every day for 3 years. The girl whose college I was paying for, whose car insurance was in my name, whose medical expenses I covered without question. You're right, I said finally. I don't own you. I never claimed to, but I did love you, both of you, and apparently that was my mistake. Brenda was crying now, but they weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration, of someone who'd been caught and was angry about it. I want to be with Marcus, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. I've wanted to be with him for months. I just didn't know how to tell you. Well, I said, standing up, now you don't have to worry about that anymore. I walked to the kitchen counter and picked up the cordless phone. What are you doing? Brenda asked, panic creeping back into her voice. I'm calling my lawyer, I said, dialing the number I'd already memorized. If you want to be with Marcus so badly, let's make that happen legally. Brian, wait. But I was already speaking into the phone. David, it's Brian Wilson. We need to talk. Today. Yes, I have the evidence. No, I'm done waiting. I hung up and turned back to my wife and stepdaughter. These two women who'd been living a double life under my roof, spending my money, eating my food, sleeping in beds I'd paid for, all while planning their exit strategy. David Thornton is the best divorce attorney in the state, I explained conversationally. He handled my colleague's divorce last year. Very thorough, very aggressive, very expensive. But since you're so eager to start your new life with Marcus, I figure it's money well spent. You can't just, Karen started. I can't just what? Divorce your mother for adultery? Protect my assets from someone who's been systematically deceiving me? Stop paying for the education of someone who clearly has no respect for me whatsoever? The fight went out of both of them simultaneously, like someone had flipped a switch. Brian, Brenda said quietly, please, let's talk about this. We are talking about it. For the first time in months, we're actually talking about what's really happening in this house. I gathered up the photographs and slipped them back into the envelope. David will be here at 2 o'clock. I suggest you decide what you want to tell him. Because, one way or another, the truth is coming out today. As I walked toward the kitchen door, Karen called after me. Where are you going? I paused at the threshold and looked back at these two people who'd shared my life, my home, and apparently, my deepest secrets, with a man who'd once broken Brenda's ribs. I'm going to my office, I said. I have some phone calls to make, some accounts to review, some plans to finalize. You know, all those boring, responsible things that apparently make me such a poor substitute for Marcus. Brian. Oh, and Brenda? I interrupted, not turning around. You might want to call Marcus and tell him the good news. After today, you'll be free to be with him as much as you want. Permanently. As I walked out of the kitchen, I heard Brenda start to cry. Real tears this time, tears of realization rather than frustration. Karen was trying to comfort her, whispering assurances that everything would be okay. But as I climbed the stairs to my home office, I knew that nothing would ever be okay again. Not for them, anyway. The old Brian, the trusting, patient, optimistic Brian, was gone forever. What remained was someone harder, colder, more calculating. Someone who'd learned that kindness was often mistaken for weakness, that generosity could be confused with stupidity, and that love sometimes wasn't enough. By the time David Thornton arrived that afternoon, I would be ready for war. David Thornton arrived at exactly 2 o'clock, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with silver threading through dark hair and the kind of confident bearing that came from winning fights for a living. Brian, he said, shaking my hand firmly, I've reviewed the materials you sent over. Quite thorough documentation. Brenda and Karen sat on the living room couch like defendants awaiting sentencing. The coffee table between us might as well have been a courtroom barrier. Before we begin, David said, settling into the armchair across from them, I want to make sure everyone understands the situation. Mrs. Wilson, you've been having an extramarital affair with your ex-husband, Marcus Parker, for approximately 4 months. Is that correct? Brenda's lawyer instincts kicked in. even though she worked in family law herself and knew better than to answer without representation. I don't have to. Actually, you do, David interrupted smoothly. Because your husband is prepared to file for divorce on grounds of adultery and he has substantial evidence to support that claim. The question is whether you want to handle this amicably or whether you'd prefer to have your private life dissected in open court. The color drained from her face. Amicably, she whispered. Excellent. David opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. Then let's discuss terms. Karen leaned forward. What kind of terms? David glanced at me and I nodded. Your stepfather has a proposal, David said. Given that your mother has clearly chosen to resume her relationship with her ex-husband, Brian is willing to facilitate that reunion in a way that protects everyone involved. He slid a document across the coffee table to Brenda. This is a separation agreement. For the next 30 days, you and Brian will be legally separated. During that time, he will have no financial responsibility for you or your daughter. You'll be free to live wherever you choose, including with Marcus, without any interference from Brian. Brenda picked up the document with shaking hands. 30 days? Think of it as a trial separation, I said, speaking for the first time since David arrived. A chance for you to see if life with Marcus is really what you want. And after 30 days? Karen asked. David answered. If your mother chooses to return to the marriage, we'll revisit the arrangement. If she chooses to stay with Marcus, Brian will file for divorce. It was beautifully crafted, this agreement. David had worked all morning to ensure it would hold up in court while giving me exactly what I needed. Legal cover for what was about to happen. What about Karen's college expenses? Brenda asked, scanning the document. During the separation period, Brian has no obligation to provide financial support for anyone, David explained. Karen is 18, legally an adult, and not Brian's biological or adopted daughter. You can't just cut off her education, Brenda protested. I leaned forward, my voice calm but firm. I've been paying for Karen's education out of generosity, not obligation. If you and she have decided that Marcus is better suited to be the man in your lives, then Marcus can handle the financial responsibilities that come with that role. Karen's face went white. My tuition is due next month. Then I guess you better hope Marcus has been saving his money, I replied. David slid another document across the table. This waives Brian's financial responsibility during the separation period and afterwards, should the separation become permanent. I'm not signing anything without my own lawyer, Brenda said, but her voice lacked conviction. Of course, David agreed, though I should point out that every day you delay is another day of legal fees accumulating. Brian is prepared to file for divorce immediately if you prefer to handle this through the courts. The room fell silent, except for the tick of the grandfather clock in the corner, a wedding gift from my parents that would probably end up in storage soon. Well, what happens to the house? Brenda asked finally. The house is in Brian's name, David explained. He purchased it before your marriage. You have no claim to it. The cars? Both registered in Brian's name. No claim. The joint accounts? Will be frozen during the separation period, then divided according to contribution. Since Brian has been the sole contributor to the joint savings account and the checking account consists primarily of his salary deposits. Brenda was beginning to understand the scope of her situation. 5 years of marriage, and she'd contributed almost nothing financially. Her part-time job at the law firm barely covered her personal expenses. Karen found her voice. This is blackmail? David's expression didn't change. This is a legal separation agreement that allows your mother to pursue her relationship with Marcus without the legal complications of adultery charges. Brian is being remarkably generous considering the circumstances. Generous? Karen's voice rose. He's cutting us off. He's removing himself from a situation where he's been systematically deceived, David corrected. If your mother wants to be with Marcus, she's free to do so. But you can't expect Brian to continue funding a lifestyle for someone who's chosen another man. I watched Brenda read through the agreement, saw the moment she realized she had no good options. Fight the divorce and have her affair exposed in court, losing any claim to spousal support, or sign the agreement and bet everything on Marcus. If I sign this, she said slowly, and things don't work out with Marcus, then you'll have learned something valuable about the difference between fantasy and reality, I said. But that's not my problem anymore. David checked his watch. I have another appointment at 4. What's your decision? Brenda looked at Karen, then at me, then at the document that would either free her to pursue her dreams or destroy her security forever. Where do I sign? She whispered. David produced an expensive pen and pointed to the signature line. Brenda signed without reading the fine print. a mistake that would cost her dearly. Karen needs to sign as well, David said, acknowledging that she understands the terms regarding her college expenses. I'm not signing anything, Karen said defiantly. Then you're not going to college, I said simply. Your choice. The defiance crumbled. She signed. David gathered the documents efficiently. The separation begins immediately. Brian, you should probably stay elsewhere tonight to avoid any complications. Already arranged, I said. I've booked a suite at the Marriott downtown. As David packed his briefcase, Brenda found her voice one last time. Brian, she said, I want you to know that I did love you. I do love you. This isn't about you not being enough. I stood and looked down at this woman who'd shared my bed for 5 years, who'd cried in my arms about her past, who'd made me believe I could heal the damage Marcus had caused. No, I said quietly. It's about you not being who I thought you were. As I walked toward the door, Karen called after me. You'll regret this, Brian. When you're alone and miserable, you'll regret destroying our family. I paused at the threshold and looked back one last time. Karen, I said, the family was already destroyed. I'm just making it official. As I closed the door behind me, I heard Brenda start to cry again. But this time I didn't feel the urge to comfort her. The old Brian would have. The old Brian would have forgiven, would have tried to work things out, would have believed that love could conquer all. But the old Brian was gone, replaced by someone who understood that sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them have exactly what they think they want. 30 days. That's all it would take for Brenda to learn the difference between the fantasy of Marcus and the reality of living with him again. I just hoped she'd survive the education. 3 weeks into the separation, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I was in Bangkok where it was early afternoon, and I was reviewing contracts for my new position with Chen and Associates. The caller ID showed Brenda's number. I let it go to voicemail. The second call came 5 minutes later, then a third. By the fourth call, curiosity got the better of me. Hello, Brenda. Brian, oh God, Brian, please. Her voice was barely recognizable, thick with tears and something else. Fear. What do you want? I asked, though I already knew. I need to come home. Please. I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. I walked to the window of my Bangkok hotel room, looking out at a city that hummed with life and possibility. Halfway around the world from the mess I'd left behind. Where are you calling from? I asked. The hospital, she whispered. Marcus, when he drinks, he gets... She didn't need to finish. I could fill in the blanks. Marcus hadn't changed. Marcus would never change. And now Brenda was remembering why she'd left him the first time. Is Karen with you? She's in the waiting room. Brian, I know I don't have the right to ask, but... You're right, I interrupted. You don't have the right to ask. You signed an agreement. You made your choice. The 30 days aren't up yet, she said desperately. I can still come back, right? The agreement said you were free to live wherever you chose. It didn't guarantee you could come back. Silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of her crying. Where are you? She asked finally. Thailand. I accepted a position with a software firm here. Bangkok is beautiful this time of year. You left the country? I left everything, Brenda. My job, my house, my life. I started over, just like you did. The house. Can we? I sold it, I lied smoothly, along with both cars. I needed the money to start fresh. The truth was more complicated. The house was still mine, sitting empty except for a property management company that collected rent from the tenants I'd found. The cars were in storage, but Brenda didn't need to know that. You sold our house? The disbelief in her voice was almost comical. It was never our house, Brenda. It was my house that you lived in, just like it was my money that paid for everything. My credit that secured the loans, my name on the deeds and titles. But what about Karen's school? What about it? Marcus can pay for her school. Marcus can provide a house. Marcus can take care of you both. That's what you wanted, remember? He doesn't have any money, she whispered. He lost his job 2 weeks ago. He's been drinking more. And when he drinks... She trailed off, but I could picture it perfectly. Marcus, unemployed and drunk, taking out his frustrations on the women who disrupted his solitary life. History repeating itself with perfect, tragic precision. That sounds like a Marcus problem, I said. Not a Brian problem. Please, she begged. I'll do anything. I'll sign any agreement you want. I'll go to counseling. Brenda, I interrupted gently. Do you remember what you told me when I asked if you were cheating? Silence. You told me that it wasn't cheating because you told me about it. Do you remember that? Brian, you looked me in the eye and told me that betraying your marriage vows wasn't actually betrayal as long as you were honest about it. I was confused. You were in love with another man. And now you're calling me from a hospital because that man put you there, just like he did before, just like he'll do again. I could hear her sobbing, could picture her in some sterile hospital corridor, probably with a fresh set of bruises, calling the man she'd abandoned for the man who'd just hurt her. I deserve this, she said finally. I know I deserve this, but Karen doesn't. She's just a kid, and she's scared, and she doesn't understand. Karen understood perfectly well when she told me I didn't own you, I said. She understood when she participated in lying to me for months. She understood when she signed the separation agreement. She's 18 years old. Exactly. She's an adult who made adult choices. Now she gets to live with adult consequences. The line went quiet except for her breathing. What do you want me to say, Brenda? That I forgive you? That I'll come running back to save you from the mess you created? That I'll pretend the last 4 months never happened? I want you to remember that you loved me once, she whispered. I did love you. I loved you enough to help you escape from Marcus the first time. I loved you enough to marry you despite your baggage. I loved you enough to treat your daughter like my own child, and you threw all of that away for a man who's now put you back in the hospital? I walked back to the window, watching traffic flow through the streets of Bangkok like blood through arteries. You want to know what I remember, Brenda? I remember you telling me that Marcus gave you something I couldn't. I remember you planning to leave me for him. I remember you involving your daughter in deceiving me. Those are the memories I'll keep. Brian, please, the separation agreement expires tomorrow, I said. After that, you'll be hearing from my lawyer about divorce proceedings. I have nowhere to go, she said desperately. You have exactly the same place you had when I met you. Nowhere. The difference is, this time, I won't be there to help you find somewhere. I ended the call and turned off my phone. The next morning, I called David Thornton. File the papers, I said. Irreconcilable differences. She can have whatever's left in the joint checking account. About $300 last I checked. I want this finished. What about the house? Keep it in my name. I might come back to the States someday. The cars? Sell them. Donate the money to a women's shelter. Something poetic about that. David laughed. You've become quite cold, Brian. No, I corrected. I've become realistic. There's a difference. 6 months later, I learned through mutual friends that Brenda and Karen were living in a studio apartment across town. Marcus had been arrested again for domestic violence and was serving 6 months in county jail. Karen had dropped out of college and was working at a retail store to help pay rent. The friends who told me this seemed to expect some reaction, sympathy perhaps, or regret. Instead, I felt nothing but a mild satisfaction that the universe had a sense of justice after all. I never spoke to either of them again. Epilogue. Bangkok. 1 year later. The rooftop bar offered a perfect view of the Bangkok skyline, all glittering lights and endless possibility. I sat with a glass of single malt whiskey, reading emails from my new life. The software company was thriving. My partnership had exceeded all expectations, and we'd just landed a contract that would set me up financially for decades. The work was challenging, the culture was fascinating, and for the first time in years, I woke up each morning excited about the day ahead. My phone buzzed with a message from David Thornton. Divorce finalized. She didn't contest anything. You're officially free. Free. Such a simple word for such a complicated concept. A year ago, I'd thought freedom meant having a family, people who depended on me, a home filled with love and laughter. Now, I understood that real freedom meant choosing who deserved your loyalty, your resources, your emotional investment. I'd learned that kindness without boundaries was just weakness, that generosity without reciprocity was just foolishness, that love without respect was just fantasy. My phone rang, an international number I didn't recognize. Probably a business call, but something made me answer. Brian? Karen's voice, older somehow, worn thin by whatever the past year had brought her. Hello, Karen. I got your number from Mom's address book. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but... She trailed off and I waited. I wanted to apologize, she said finally, for everything. For lying to you, for being part of Mom's, for helping her hurt you. Okay, I said simply. That's it? Just okay. What else do you want me to say? I don't know. Maybe that you forgive me. Maybe that you understand I was just trying to help my mom be happy? I watched the sun set over Bangkok, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Karen, I said gently, you weren't trying to help your mother be happy. You were trying to help her have what she wanted without consequences. There's a difference. She's miserable now, Karen said. We both are. Marcus is in jail. We can barely afford rent. I had to drop out of school. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you really? Or are you glad we're suffering? The question hung in the air between us, carried across thousands of miles of ocean and time. I'm not glad you're suffering, I said honestly. But I'm not surprised by it either. Actions have consequences, Karen, always. Would you consider helping us? Just temporarily until we get back on our feet? No. The finality of the word seemed to surprise her. Just no? After everything we meant to each other? We never meant anything to each other, Karen. That was the illusion I was living under. You made it very clear that I was nothing more than your mother's meal ticket. I was 18. I was stupid and angry and... You were 18 and old enough to make choices. Now you're 19 and old enough to live with them. She was crying now, soft sounds that might have moved me once upon a time. I know I don't deserve your help, she said. But Mom, she talks about you sometimes, about how good you were to us. She knows she made a mistake. She made a choice, Karen, a very deliberate, calculated choice. The mistake was mine for believing that choice was about love instead of security. So that's it? You would just write us off completely? I finished my whiskey and signaled the bartender for another. Karen, let me ask you something. If Marcus hadn't turned out to be the same abusive drunk he'd always been, if he'd had money and a nice house and could have provided for you both, would you be calling me now? Silence. That's what I thought, I said. You're not calling because you miss me or because you've realized I was a good man who deserved better? You're calling because Marcus didn't work out and you need another safety net.